Okay, I think we're good to go. Should I just dive right in or whoop? Right. Hi there, everyone. My name is David Runge. I'm an academic advisor with the Advisement Center, primarily working with students in the College of Liberal Arts, Sciences, and Engineering. Also, an instructor for GST 109, Who Do You Think You Are, which is a diversity, identity, social justice fulfilling course, amongst a couple other general education, not general education, GST courses as well. And today I'm going to talk very briefly about some different ways in which I've used AI just to help form some of my classes, do a little bit of very basic research, and some applications I've used for my actual professional position as well. So we'll dive on in. Let me make sure that it's up there and we'll take it away. So I'll be going through basically three different scenarios today, ways in which I use AI at very low levels. I'll preface everything by saying that I am not an advanced user, I'm not a power user, but maybe in saying that, it demonstrates that even if you're a skeptic or if you're hesitant to use it or feel very technology averse, there still are pretty simple and easy ways to utilize. Hopefully, that's really the takeaway from this particular chat. But maybe potentially even lessons I picked up along the way, general tips and tricks that I've sometimes had to discover the hard way through constant refining of things to hopefully get to the best end result possible. So three basic scenarios, looking to search for materials to use in a course, helping with some general research, and then practical professional applications as well. So kind of go through an example here of the challenge, how I used it, and then some lessons I learned. So with the first example here, I'll talk a little bit about trying to identify new class resources. So one of the courses I instruct, that GST 109, Who Do You Think You Are course, is all about identity exploration and development. And in the manner in which I teach the course myself and a co-instructor, we actually use the game Dungeons and Dragons as a manner in which to explore concepts of self-identity and to dive further into understandings of that concept. So it's our learning tool. Now, when trying to consider what we can use within D&D, it's a very, very large media platform, a rich historical tradition going back, 50 years or so across books, tabletop games, board games, video games, movie, all sorts of different things. So one of the challenges in trying to identify, well, what can I draw from is where do I even start, right? Where can I begin there? And the last time we taught the course, we focused pretty heavily on public or open access material, especially those that we might find through online articles and whatnot for students. But I really, really wanted to dive into, can I help them to sink into something a little more critical and help them to analyze things? So that was really where I was approaching this. What would be most applicable? It would most help students when they're trying to learn, but also in teaching the class. So here I used Gemini as the tool to try to draw information from, and I started with a very, very open question. And this is one of the lessons I even learned in the process. Are there specific text or books? I really wanted to start with that, keeping the media aside, the movies and the films aside. Are there specific text or books in D&D literature that would support readings in a course based on identity exploration and development, or examples of bias, discrimination, and groupthink? These are some of the things we touch on in the class. Now, I already recognize that when I was putting this together, it's such a broad question that I'm going to get a really, really wide response, which can be challenging. And as we've heard in the past, for those who attended the Gemini presentation that happened not too long ago on campus, it draws across kind of the most common responses, and it's not going to be the perfect result, but it's going to be kind of an aggregate of everything here. So when I first put that inquiry in, it pulled up a lot of what we call source books in D&D, which is basically how to play the game, right? Settings and worlds and things of that nature, which I didn't find that particularly helpful. But it also did bring up some pieces of literature. So actual written texts, novels, different fictionalizations of these worlds. And that's where I was really looking for. And you can actually see on the screen there at the right, a summary table that talks about some of those different themes, examples from within the D&D landscape, and then potential readings. One of those that caught my eye there is the one that's labeled Homeland, and it gives the actual author there. So, okay, that's something I can actually draw upon and maybe use in my class, whereas the other ones are all those different source books. And then from there, what I really tried to do was identify, are there specific passages, chapters, characters, phrases that I can use? So rather than having to flip through the entire book or go through many different texts, can I find maybe the exact quote or the exact chapter that I can pull out for really kind of diving into with the class as well? So this is where I really learned one of the first lessons that I have, and it's really that you need to clarify what you're talking about and what you're looking for. If you search broadly, you're going to get broad answers, not as topically specific as what you might want. So I did a couple more revisions, and one of the later queries that I had, once I finally got down to specific books that I wanted, I asked them, okay, are there specific chapters here? And this is where the system actually helped me to dive further in and identify a really specific chapter, a heading for the chapter as well. And it's important to note that using a tool like this doesn't actually get you the resource. And I think it's actually important and it's a good thing. So I still, in this case, I use my interlibrary loan tool to actually physically pick up the book. I looked through various online platforms, but I had to still pick it up to really get to it. But at the end of the day, even this was a little bit flawed. That by the time I found, in theory, a potential area where I could maybe draw something from, when I actually got the book, had it in my hand and physically looked at it, and went right to the chapter where it said, I didn't actually find what it was, right? They basically had a hallucination, which you've probably heard about before. And that the summary here, where it talks about a certain chapter, it says this chapter contains a famous internal monologue. So initially I thought, wow, this is going to be a great resource to talk about. But then it was kind of fell short once I actually got to it. So you want to be aware of how the system is presenting information to you, and that it might be doing so in a way that is trying to favor your response or get you to buy into it. So look for maybe that flowery or more reinforcing and supportive language when you're looking through things that might be very discerning. But I was able to still use it after a couple more inquiries to dive in and find a couple of different texts and books that hopefully we're going to be able to use in the next edition of our course. But it's always important to double check your work when you're going through this. So now the second thing, I'm still going to stick with my Dungeons and Dragons theme because I'm a nerd who is true to his passion right here. Myself and a colleague are also doing a research paper. We're contributing to a collection of essays on fungal horror, on mushrooms and how they pop up in different media landscapes. And here there's a creature in Dungeons and Dragons known as a myconid. So from there, we were basically trying to prove our point that the myconid actually subverts the trope of fungal horror. So in this capacity, I used the AI tool again to search broadly across all of the different media landscapes that exist within D&D. And this was particularly helpful because with D&D materials in particular, a lot of the older modules, the ones that were in the earliest editions of the game, may be really inaccessible, no longer in print, and it might not be something I can as easily gain access to, but from here I might be able to help it use it to find various online resources or screen captures and whatnot from those old materials, which oftentimes have been digitized in different capacities. So when I really dove into this, I needed to look at a lot of the different pieces of information. I use this really intentionally because if I'm doing my research, I wanted to look at what is the big scope of what I'm trying to figure out. Dungeons and Dragons has 5 different editions to it. So I particularly made sure to ask, can you look across the various editions? How can I expand this out as well? And this is where I use it as my look back tool, my research over time, see how things have changed. And what I really love that it did, this is where I think it can be effective as a research tool, is that it does a nice job of summarizing different material and then presented it to me in a chronological order or a thematic order along the way as well. And then in addition to that, as I was going along, I really value that it actually gave me the specific chapters and pages again that I can certainly draw from, so that when I went to the different source materials, I was able to go directly to what I was looking for. So this really helps me to cut down on the length of time that I would otherwise need to be diving into each material, waiting for it to arrive, and going case by case just to find, okay, well, this certain material maybe only has 1 chapter or 1 sentence on it. It might not be the best and most effective use of my time. So it's really good for getting a lot of information really quickly. What I also value with the tool, and this is actually something that I found to be particularly helpful in the context of what I mentioned before with that idea of hallucinations, is that at times you kind of basically ask you to show you the source. And you can see on the right there when it talks about some of the information I was looking for, the small circular bubble, looks like a button almost, where it basically tells you what source it is drawing from. So from there, I was able to basically link out and take a look myself. Was that actual and accurate information that I can use? Or was it, again, hallucinating? Was it misconstraining a couple of different things together? In this particular case here, all the sources that it did pull from had some value, but the last one was actually more of a commentary and was more of a separate entity rather than actual source material itself. So I had to take that with a grain of salt rather than knowing that it was directly the original source. So if you do have access to the original source material, it always is a good idea to just cross-reference and check to make sure that whatever you are pulling up is accurate, that it is the correct information. And I did see points in times where when it did give me wrong information, I would actually challenge the system and say, well, wait a minute, I think you're wrong. Can you check that again? Can you make sure you have the correct information? And oftentimes, if I did bring that up, it would acknowledge that I think you're right, and it would maybe amend its response with the new and updated information. One particular strategy I found helpful to combating this as well is if I'm looking in a larger material for something, sometimes trying to type in something like an ISBN number to give it the exact text I'm looking for, or being really, really specific about the context or the edition or years of print can help to limit the search rather than pulling from a really, really wide variety of sources, which might then conflict with one another. And then I'll very briefly give one more example here for you of a way I've also used it, now stepping outside of what I've done with kind of class and research, but more just what I do with my everyday work. So as many of you might be familiar with, we're in the process of adapting a new advisement model on campus. And as a result of that, we're looking again at how some of our academic probation processes come up. So in one particular meeting with various academic advisors this past year, we talked about this might be a great time to review how do our academic probation processes work? Are there better ways to approach things? And can we try new and improved strategies as well? So after that meeting took place, I went back to my office and said, well, let's take a big picture glance and what's happening all over the place. Let's step outside of our institution. I have conversations with my colleagues every single day where we talk about these topics, but what's happening elsewhere? So I used the AI system to try to do a big picture review of how do academic probation processes work on a larger scale. So again, a very broad initial inquiry, which could likely be very much improved knowing I am a fairly novice user. I asked it to collect best practices in academic probation advisement for students in higher education with a focus on four-year regional comprehensives, trying to really aim at what we are, and with detailed pages of specific action items students might need to accomplish as part of any academic recovery or probationary plans. Now, as you're probably even hearing this or seeing this, or are already maybe a couple of challenges, I threw a lot of information at it really quickly. I asked for a very broad topical scope, but it at least gave me some general starting points. And this is where it gave me a chance to dive into what practices are out there. And specifically, this was a big time saver when I did this. In the past, if I were to do something like this, if I wanted to get information, I would have maybe had to go to each school individually, look at their webpage, try to use the correct search terms, and even if I'm roughly in the know of what the industry language is, it can vary a little bit by institution to institution, practice to practice. And then I have to navigate through every single web page. And if you've ever gone to another institution's web page, it might be very different than our own. And even if you think you know where you're going to, it ends up in different spots. So this helped me to kind of cut through that proverbial needle in a haystack and get what I needed more quickly. But the important thing, of course, again, is the refinement process. So I specifically asked for a regional four-year school. And it could have been improved by even saying maybe particularly a SUNY school if I really wanted to look at our nearest sister institutions as well. Even then, with this particular example I gave, regional four-year, you can see some of the examples it gave back to me as well. And I'm not an expert on classifications, but I don't know if the University of Memphis is a regional four-year comprehensive. I think it might be a little bit bigger than that, though I could be wrong. But it's important to know particularly how those come up. Interestingly, I did see that Buffalo State popped up in the initial response amongst some others as well. So it helped me to get a lot of information quickly and gave me some examples, gave me some best practices that I could use. And what was nice about it is that it presented it in such a way that was easily digestible. I do think this tool is really useful at presenting it in like charts or with the bullet points so you can quickly comb through that. The lesson I would take away from this, though, or the important second part of this, is that it should not be used as a replacement for the work of building relationships and making connections with the peers and those sister institutions. As advisors, I'm a member of a listserv that is pretty active where we share advising best practices. And I wouldn't want this to replace the process of asking my colleagues and my peers what they're doing, developing those relationships, because there's real value in that, especially when we're going beyond maybe just the factual retrieval information, but we're getting into the real nitty gritty of the practical effects of a policy that we're implementing as well. Rather, though, this could be a great tool where you can use this as a springboard. Maybe you start off with your initial inquiry, a school pops up, and then you use that as a starting point to identify at that particular school a contact person that you want to talk to or dive into for follow-up information. So it's really important that we don't use this just as a replacement for the work, but as a supplement to what we're doing as well. So those are the three particular examples that I had when I was going through this. Right, there we go. And I would invite any questions, or if others have had examples of their own, how they have used it. Again, these are all pretty low level uses, but hopefully even as you're hearing this, it gives you a chance to see that even if you're a hesitant user, even if you're someone who doesn't know how to dive in, starting off can give you some great ways to maybe speed up things you would otherwise need to spend a lot of time on. Again, for me, needing to do the research, going through maybe source book by source book or lots of different novels to find a small chapter that I was looking for. This helped me to cast a wide net very quickly, identify what might be some good resources, and then I can be more critical and analyze those after I take a look at those. So I think that's about all I have, but hopefully a couple of ideas or strategies and makes it a little less scary to any of you listening if you are thinking about starting to use it.
Any questions? You can either unmute or type them into chat.
And I will say that definitely quite a few things I picked up again, even at that previous workshop that we had, I think last week. One of the things that was really eye-opening to me was this idea of telling the tool to act as this or act as that, and to give it the defined limitations of when it's done as well. So as I'm continuing to do use these tools for my either research or educational purposes, I'm going to refine a lot of these things and see what different results I get to see if it even helps it even more. So that was really helpful for me.
Jackie said thank you, and yes, we do act as a career coach. Okay, very good.
Awesome. Thank you all.
If you could stop the recording.
Stop recording.